scope 1 and 2 are the direct emissions within an organization, and scope 3 is everything else that touches the work that's done through the supply chain or further up with the consumers. So it's very clear as part of the guidance that when we're looking, for example, at national targets, we don't count scope 3 because that would be double counting. But the idea of an organization understanding its scope 3 is really important, because that allows us to then tackle throughout the value chain.
So I think one thing that struck us from the very first meetings was that, particularly if you've worked in sustainability for many, many years, there's this almost this paralysis that you can feel by being addicted to trying to get to an accurate measurement, or trying to get the detailed guidance, or trying to find out what specifically you need to do, maybe even spending lots of time trying to benchmark your peers. I think one thing that this last year especially has realized is that we need to get on with it. Not just because of obvious pressures that the planet is under, but also because boards and people are setting targets, and you need to get cracking with them. And the danger is that people felt in this group that if we're not careful, we might spend another 10 years worrying about, to the nth degree, about how we get a number accurate and how we look at the methodology. And so one key principle throughout the whole group for the last year has been, how do we make this about a number going down rather than just trying to get that number more accurate?
There's two kind of things that you're trying to do is one, have ease, like having reporting that is straightforward, high accuracy, repeatable, all of those things in an easy manner. And then the second is having it such that you can effectively manage emissions reductions. So you can prove that you've made a saving or something in your reporting. Then you might have an emerging area is the supplier data collection tools. These are quite exciting, but at the moment, so what they do is go up the tiers of your supply chain and ask for some data, and that has like a network benefit. So supply shift might be an example in that area. But again, at the moment, they haven't really got the full coverage to cover all the reporting needs. And then the last area is really the kind of custom models and integrated data systems. And this is where some of the larger companies are going. They want to own the data transfers themselves. And the reason they're looking at some of this stuff is because they're concerned about being able to forecast and the amount of activity data they need to generate and put into a third-party system. They find that actually integrating it into their own systems might be an option.
We are ensuring that the supply chain participants are implementing their own measurements of their scope 3 emissions through a credible and internationally recognized program or platform like Verco. And so one, we're looking at that at the facility and the crop level, but where it's absolutely key is we're looking at the governance. So we do an assessment on not just how they're implementing it, but how they're governing that implementation of that. And throughout the assessment, they have to provide that evidence. So if it's a report from a certain company that's measuring their CO2 emissions, then they have to provide that evidence. They have to provide the report or provide evidence that they are engaged.
This is not just about collecting and measuring and reporting on data. At every step, it needs to be incorporated. It needs to be a collaboration to both reduce the emissions and work to get those reductions, and at the same time to collect that data. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. You need to have a certain level of data so you can understand where to start, to be able to understand what needs work to fix it. But you can't wait to have all of that data perfect before you get going. So it's really a collaboration. So where we have direct contact with our farmers, we're working very closely with them on regenerative agriculture, making all of their practices more resilient and more sustainable. And at the same time, then collecting that primary data. And in terms of double counting, so the scope 3 is really about being able to use your influence throughout your whole value chain to reduce. And so I'd say rather than double counting it, it's actually double or triple influencing. So it's true that many of our total emissions might also appear in the total emissions for Unilever or Cargill or whatever else. So what's counted in terms of national targets is really that scope 1 and 2. And then that scope 3, we might be sharing some of those emissions with some of our suppliers, but it's as it's based on volumes, then that should actually be limited to within our own emissions calculations. How it can be avoided, it's really about having the better data and about having the systems to be able to calculate more accurately.